Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the really explosive origins of the American Revolution. We're going to look at exactly how 13 deeply prosperous and honestly deeply loyal colonies ended up transforming into a rebellious new nation, the United States of America. It's an absolutely incredible story of shifting loyalties and rising tensions. So let's break down exactly how it all happened. Okay, to really get the psychology behind this huge shift, I want you to put yourself in the shoes of a colonist for just a second. Imagine living in a place where you have absolutely zero voice. You work incredibly hard, you pay your taxes, you're building a thriving society, right? But every single decision that actually affects your daily life, your business, and your family is being dictated by a king and a government stationed literally thousands of miles away across an ocean. I mean, how long do you think a society would realistically accept that kind of arrangement?
Section 1. The 13 Colonies.
So, setting the scene back in the mid-1700s, life was actually pretty great for folks living along the eastern coast of North America. These colonies were prosperous, fiercely ambitious, and growing at an unprecedented rate. And while they were, for sure, firmly under British rule, they actually operated with a surprising amount of day-to-day autonomy. Local governments handled the local issues, you had merchants trading freely, farmers working these massive stretches of land, and ports like Boston, New York, and Philadelphia were just these bustling epicenters of global commerce. For the most part, the people driving this economic engine saw themselves as entirely loyal British subjects. They loved their local freedom, their economy was booming, and they really had no reason to rock the boat. Section 2. A costly victory. But then, the catalyst hits that completely shatters this peaceful status quo. The year is 1763. The French and Indian War has just wrapped up. Now, Britain actually won this war, which effectively secured North America, but that victory came at an astronomical price. The British government was suddenly left staring down an enormous, crushing national debt. Wars are incredibly expensive, and the Crown was absolutely desperate for new revenue streams to manage this massive financial burden. So to solve their crisis, Parliament looked across the Atlantic and turned their sights squarely on their wealthy, rapidly expanding American colonies. And this right here, this sets up a fundamental, completely irreconcilable disconnect between the two sides. Over in London, the logic was pretty straightforward. The British government had just fought a long, bloody war to protect these very colonies, so asking them to help foot the bill for that protection seemed entirely fair. But if you're a colonist, someone who has been operating with functional independence for generations, this felt like a dangerous overreach. Being forced to pay taxes by a government an ocean away didn't feel like a fair contribution. To them, it felt like the very beginning of tyranny.
Section 3. Taxation without representation. So this intense ideological clash turns into a full-blown crisis in 1765, when Parliament drops the Stamp Act. For the very first time, colonists were forced to pay direct taxes on everyday items. And this wasn't just a small niche tax, it hit almost every facet of colonial life. You want a newspaper to get your daily information? Taxed. Need legal documents to run your business? Taxed. Licenses. Practically all printed materials taxed. You literally couldn't participate in civil society or run a basic enterprise without feeling the immediate financial sting of this new mandate.
Now, obviously, nobody likes paying taxes, right? But the underlying issue here went way deeper than just the financial cost. The core grievance was deeply political. The colonists had absolutely no representatives in the British Parliament. Zero. They had no vote and they had no voice. Yet this distant governing body was just consistently passing these sweeping, coercive laws that directly impacted their everyday lives. Which brings us to no taxation without representation. Back in 1765, this was a radical, powerful slogan that started echoing across all 13 colonies. It captured the exact frustration that was finally boiling over. It wasn't just a catchy protest chant either. It was a fundamental, unyielding demand for basic political rights. And you know what? The colonists didn't just sit around complaining. They fought back in some really structured, impactful ways. First off, ordinary citizens started organizing these massive public protests, channeling all that grassroots anger into highly visible resistance. Then they hit them where it hurts, the economy. Colonial merchants organized widespread boycotts of British goods. They just flat out refused to buy what Britain was selling, which absolutely crippled London's revenue. Finally, you start seeing the emergence of highly organized, determined groups like the Sons of Liberty, who were explicitly formed to resist British control. So what started as civilian annoyance rapidly evolved into an organized, unified front of defiance.
Section 4. The Seeds of Revolution. Believe it or not, these intense boycotts and protests actually worked. Well, for a minute anyway. The severe economic pressure actually forced Britain to repeal the Stamp Act. But if anyone thought the drama was over, they were entirely wrong. The underlying conflict was really just beginning to fracture the empire. The repeal of the Stamp Act was immediately followed by a relentless wave of new legislation. Post-1765, Britain passes the Townshend Acts, which taxed everyday essentials like glass, lead, paint, and paper. And then later came the infamous Tea Act. With every single new law, colonial anger just compounded. Any remaining trust between Britain and its American colonies completely evaporated, leading to a total breakdown of the relationship. So, the stage is now perfectly set for a massive confrontation. The colonies are united in their anger, Britain is stubbornly determined to maintain its imperial control, and the powder keg is packed tight. With trust completely destroyed and tensions at an all-time high, how would a single, fateful night in the bustling port of Boston ignite a spark that would change world history forever? Well, that is exactly where this story leaves us hanging. It's a great reminder that massive historical shifts often hinge on the actions of just a few determined individuals on one unexpected night. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity to go explore exactly what happened. Welcome to this explainer. Today we're looking at one of the absolute most fascinating chain reactions in all of human history. It's literally a domino effect. We're going to see how this seemingly simple dispute over taxes rapidly escalated, just toppling over straight into the birth of a brand new nation, the United States of America. It is just an incredible story. We're talking high tension, outright rebellion, and these monumental shifts in power. I honestly can't wait to walk you through the whole shebang. Let's get right into it. Picture this, all right? It's December 16th, 1773. It is a freezing cold, incredibly tense night out in Boston Harbor. You've got this group of colonists, carefully disguised as Native Americans, just silently, stealthily boarding 3 anchored British ships. There's no shouting here, no massive chaotic brawl. It's just the hyper-focused, quiet work of pure defiance right under the cover of darkness. Part 1. The breaking point. Okay, let's dive into this. So, why were they targeting these specific ships in the dead of night? Well, the British had just forced through the Tea Act, which was this blatant, undeniable attempt to enforce unfair taxation without any colonial consent. And to put the sheer scale of this protest into perspective, just look at this number, 342. That is exactly how many chests of tea these colonists literally smashed open that night. Working in total absolute silence, they hoisted thousands of pounds of tea and just dumped the whole lot straight into the icy water. This was an incredibly bold, massive act of economic sabotage, and as you know, it became famous as the Boston Tea Party. Part 2. Punishments and Unity. Unsurprisingly, King George III was absolutely furious. He decided the colonies had crossed a hard line here, and, well, they needed to be severely punished. So, Parliament claps back with a series of brutal laws known in America as the Intolerable Acts. And just think about the immense, suffocating weight of this retaliation for a second. Boston Harbor, boom, completely closed to all trade. Colonial self-government, heavily restricted. And to top it all off, actual British troops were sent in directly to enforce royal authority. But here's why this matters, and what you really should take away from this moment. These incredibly harsh laws, they completely backfired on the British Empire. See, instead of crushing the rebellion or dividing the colonies through fear, these brutal punishments actually united them like never before. It was like pouring gasoline on a fire. This shared outrage forged a totally new, powerful bond. For the very first time, people scattered all across these different colonies started looking at their situation and realizing, you know what? Patching things up with the crown just isn't going to work anymore. Actually, scratch that, it was completely off the table. They started to truly believe that total, complete independence might literally be their only viable solution. Part 3. The first shots. Fast forward to April 1775. Hundreds of heavily armed British soldiers are already on the march toward Concord. Their mission? Seize secret colonial weapons and snuff out this resistance once and for all. But the colonists had their own network of spies. Just imagine the sudden, terrifying urgency in the dead of night as Paul Revere rides desperately through the countryside, spreading the alarm the British are coming. He and several other riders are literally racing against the clock, warning these militia networks so they can mobilize before the sun even peaks over the horizon. At sunrise on April 19th,
Those British troops come face to face with armed colonists in the small town of Lexington. The standoff is incredibly tense. You could practically hear a pin drop. And then, a shot rings out. Now, to this day, no one knows exactly who fired that mysterious first bullet, but within seconds, total chaos erupts. Gunfire just fills the air. This single mysterious bullet became known as the shot heard around the world. It was the literal spark that officially ignited the American Revolutionary War.
As the fighting pushed on down the road toward Concord, the stark contrast between how these two sides fought became glaringly obvious. I mean, the British Army was used to rigid, highly disciplined formations out on open battlefields. But the colonists, they scattered. They used unconventional guerrilla tactics. They're firing from behind trees, hiding behind stone walls, flanking from open fields. This unexpected, really scrappy combat style caught the British completely off guard, and it resulted in some incredibly heavy casualties for the Empire by the end of the day.
Part 4. Washington takes command.
Now, by May 1775, the Second Continental Congress realizes a pretty sobering truth. Scattered local militias fighting from behind trees, yeah, that's never going to defeat the world's most powerful empire in a prolonged, dragged-out war. They needed a unified army. So they appoint George Washington to lead it. And what's really interesting here is the sheer overwhelming scale of the mismatch he was walking into. On one side, Washington is facing an absolute juggernaut. Highly disciplined, massively funded, perfectly supplied. And on the other side, the brand new Continental Army. We are talking ordinary farmers, blacksmiths, merchants. They liked proper weapons, they liked uniforms, food. Many didn't even have shoes. Some were literally carrying their own personal hunting rifles instead of military muskets. No way, right? Yet, Washington accepts this massive burden with incredible humility, using immense discipline to forge these men into a real, legitimate fighting force. Let's move along and see how this builds, because this escalation was lightning fast. In December 1773, we've got a bold but still pretty localized protest with the Boston Tea Party. Then, less than a year and a half later, in April 1775, we hit the first deadly shots of open combat. And just over a single year after that, in July 1776, we arrive at the ultimate political leap, the Declaration of Independence. I mean, we go from a localized dispute over tea taxes to an all-out war for sovereignty in the absolute blink of an eye. Part 5. Declaring Independence. The point of no return had officially arrived. This prompts Congress to task a young Virginian named Thomas Jefferson with drafting a document that would literally change human history. Adopted on July 4, 1776, it contained words that still resonate so deeply with us today: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Let's just give those words some breathing room for a second, right? Because this wasn't just some political breakup letter sent across the Atlantic. It was a massively bold philosophical shift. It openly proclaimed that all men are created equal and possess unalienable rights that no monarch, no matter how powerful, can ever take away. So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is how this document entirely redefined the whole concept of power itself. It laid out some truly revolutionary core arguments. First, that governments derive their power only from the consent of the governed. Second, when a government becomes tyrannical, the people possess the absolute right to change it. And with those powerful strokes of a pen, the ties to the British Empire were officially severed for good, and the 13 colonies officially became the United States of America. But as we wrap up this incredible explainer, I want to leave you with a massive, looming reality check. Because declaring independence on a piece of parchment, that was one thing. Winning it on the actual battlefield against the absolute greatest military machine of the age would be far, far more difficult. Are they ready? I mean, how could this brand new, completely poorly equipped nation possibly survive the storm that was coming next? It's a monumental cliffhanger for sure, and it's exactly what makes the history of this era so incredibly fascinating to dig into. Thank you so much for exploring this with me today. All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we are jumping right into the dramatic final phases of the American Revolution. We're going to look closely at our source material to understand exactly how a freezing, starving, totally underdog militia somehow managed to pull off the impossible and literally defeat a global superpower. I mean, it all boils down to one absolutely monumental question, right? How exactly did a small, freezing colonial militia defeat the greatest military empire on the planet? Well, to figure that out, we have to look at the timeline. So here is the map of our journey. 1777, the Valley Forge Camp and the Battle of Saratoga. Then 1781, the surrender at Yorktown. 1783 brings the Treaty of Paris, 1787 the Constitution is drafted, and finally, 1789, the first presidency. We're tracing a rapid, kind of chaotic path from the absolute brink of defeat right through to the triumphant birth of a brand new nation. Let's walk through how each impossible milestone led to the next. Part 1. The darkest winter at Valley Forge. 12,000. By the winter of 1777, General George Washington and nearly 12,000 exhausted soldiers were forced to retreat and set up a winter camp at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. Just try to imagine that for a second. Trying to keep 12,000 people alive in the dead of winter with practically zero supplies. The sheer scale of the suffering here was, well, it was staggering. Snow covered the ground for months on end. Food was so incredibly scarce that soldiers survived on what they called fire cake. It's basically just a completely tasteless mix of flour and water baked on a rock. They had no proper shoes, no warm clothing. Disease spread like wildfire through the camp, claiming hundreds of lives. Yet, despite this absolute nightmare of a situation, Washington flat out refused to surrender. So, how do you take a bunch of freezing, exhausted volunteers and turn them into a professional fighting force? Well, enter Baron Friedrich von Steuben. He was a Prussian military officer who brought in strict discipline and modern tactics. Reportedly, he did this while swearing at the troops in this wild mix of German and French. He completely transformed the army. But, to really understand what kept their hope alive during that brutal winter in the first place, we actually have to rewind to a miraculous victory that happened just a few months prior. Which brings us to Part 2, a crucial turning point, the Battle of Saratoga. Back in the fall of 1777, British commanders tried a strategy to divide the colonies, but American forces totally surrounded them, forcing General John Burgoyne to surrender. This was huge. It was the first major American victory. Up until this exact moment, everyone in Europe just assumed Britain would easily crush this little rebellion. But overnight, Saratoga proved the Americans actually had a real fighting chance. And Saratoga was the ultimate game changer, because it convinced France, specifically King Louis XVI, to openly back the United States. They poured in crucial financial aid, real money, along with weapons, munitions, heavy naval warships, and thousands of French soldiers. Honestly, without this backing, independence might never have happened. The American Revolution had suddenly upgraded from a localized rebellion into a full-scale international war. Part 3. The final battle at Yorktown. Fast forward a bit to 1781. British General Charles Cornwallis moved his army to Yorktown, Virginia. And George Washington? He saw a rare, decisive tactical opportunity for a massive pincer movement. Here's how it played out. Step 1. American troops march south overland. Step 2. That powerful French Navy we just talked about swoops in to block any British escape by sea, so Cornwallis is totally trapped. And then the trap snaps shut with Step 3. Weeks of relentless, heavy artillery bombardment. And then, on October 19, 1781, the impossible happened. Cornwallis finally surrendered. As thousands of British soldiers laid down their weapons, legend actually says the British band played a tune called The World Turned Upside Down. And it truly had. Against all odds, a small colonial army, backed by their international allies, had just defeated the greatest military empire on Earth. Part 4. Forging a new government, the Constitution. Now, the 1773 Treaty of Paris officially recognized the United States as a free and sovereign nation. But as you can probably guess, winning the war was really only half the battle, because freedom alone doesn't keep the lights on or pay the bills. The country was incredibly fragile and desperately needed stability. So, in 1787, delegates essentially locked themselves in a room in Philadelphia to draft a completely new operating system for the country, the United States Constitution. They knew exactly what they didn't want, right? They did not want another king. Instead, they designed a groundbreaking system totally from scratch. They divided the government into 3 equal branches: the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. And the genius of this was the system of checks and balances. It was a direct reaction to the tyranny they had just fought an entire war to escape. It was specifically engineered to prevent any one person or any one branch from gaining absolute power. This careful design laid the stable groundwork for a republic, which allowed George Washington to safely step up as the very first president in 1789. Part 5. A lasting global legacy, the ideas that changed history.
Ultimately, the American Revolution was far, far more than just a fight over territory. Think about it. From the frozen, miserable fields of Valley Forge to the ultimate victory at Yorktown, the immense courage of ordinary people was fueled by one radical idea: the belief that ordinary citizens should have the right to choose their own government. It really all boils down to this core philosophy: no ruler should stand above the law. By hardwiring this exact belief into their new constitution, they cemented a legacy of liberty, democracy, and representative government that would go on to inspire revolutions across the entire globe. More than 2 centuries later, the ideas born in that harsh winter and cemented in Philadelphia are still actively shaping our modern world. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this thought. How does that unwavering belief in liberty continue to shape the world and the government you interact with today? Thanks so much for joining me.